criminal use of judicial activism in order to reverse long-standing developments inside the Constitution, which is by definition under American law, which under American Black Law Dictionary specifically details the assumption that every term is to be defined ambiguously as to encompass the most amount of people in order to validate the broadest definitions, qualifying the unarbitrary meaning of the words, which allows for the proceedings of policies to be conducted to a general public, which is overly diverse by comparison to the limited intelligence of whoever, no matter how educated the author of the policies are, qualifying true intent by the definition of the expectation of law from the general public. The public's expectation of law is the highest law in the United States under the law. It is, by definition, the pinnacle of what was legally authorized to be the proceedings of how to translate all of the laws. And the refusal to do so is the development into Confederate insurrection through the criminal insurgencies compromising the executive, which, such as through the FBI, who sought a Nazi coup against the United States and then continued to develop contingencies to the insurrection against the United States, has actively infiltrated other departments, such as in the military, judiciary, legislative, and every other power center, in order to compromise it with double agents, qualifying the overthrow of the office into the interest of the hate group and individual who has acquired the office over the definition of the office, which exists exclusively to serve the national and social interests, qualifying them as insurrectionist traitors. The judicial activism in question seeks to reverse the precedents of the development of society under the correct definition of how to translate ambiguous terms. This restraint against precedent in favor of Confederacy is an act of judicial activism which equates to abject treason. Their sole definition is the purging of power away from the American elected government, away from the republic, which the states do not possess in these scenarios, nor the federal government in these scenarios, qualifying their actions as insurrectionist terrorist organizations without a legal government, which would increase the desire to remove reliance on American policy, such as those who have legitimately acquired the offices, as opposed to subcontractors and mercenaries and malicious. Now, the use of these arbitrary contracts as second parties to the function of government for the Confederate orders qualifies them to ignore the Constitution under the hate group policy, allowing for infinite damages to be viable, whereas the American government would have been restrained in these scenarios, qualifying the damages and destabilizing against the general public, which includes the dissolving of legal definitions as to completely shatter them into a state of nonsense and meaninglessness, and when they officially mean nothing, such as the right to liberty, not including the right to not be coerced, the right to liberty as the right to be coerced into morality, developing the superposition of the sovereign or the superior entity, applying punishments and rewards on the basis of this arbitrary government morality, is a religion developed by the government. The establishment of the government religion creates the priesthood of the insurrectionist terrorist organization such as the Neo-KKK, who are the clergy who actively enforce the arbitrary dictates of the secret policies, completely separated from the public will and expectation, dissolving any pretense of law into anarchy, and anarchy being the start of the Nazis' system, qualifies the success or failure of the FBI Nazi insurrectionist contingencies, targeting American leaderships and ideals for aggressive censorship and abuse, qualifying voter fraud as to replace the Republic with the hate group. The military intelligence, having acknowledged these positions at the highest censor grade, qualifies the estimate of the War on David, which generates the superposition of the replacement policies to the Republic, qualifying the alternative government to the Republic, the anti-America's policies, which we have all seen and suffered the injuries to, versus the American ones, which they've actively obstructed. Who's been elected? What policies have passed? What policies did the Confederacy fail to pass? This is all secret data obstructed for the specific confusion of the general public to an infinite cycle of injury against the public until they have fully succumbed to the suicide mission, which is the false policies designed for the disillusionment of the general public's power until they've completely reconstructed the wealth structure according to the racist hate group function, which will devour itself, qualifying the structure on the basis of hate group statuses and not upon any form of meritocracy. And without the function of meritocracy, it doesn't matter how good or bad you are, or how aggressive or passive you are, or any kind of variation. It is a communist dictate by a wizard clan certifying your permanent status, writing a poison script from Fruit of the Poison Tree, qualifying your history according to the hate group, as opposed to your own decisions, in which case every punishment that you suffer will be completely made up and unlegal, qualifying an infinite threat by a terrorist organization, registering the American obligation to never negotiate with terrorists, which infinitely compounds on itself because specifically they are never going to change their minds. You can't convince them of anything other than what they've already written. The war on terror, in order to justify the wars in the Middle East, is caused by an inside job such as the function of 9/11, which would have been stopped if mine and your enemies did not restrain me, qualifying the obstruction of the contracts which would have secured against the 9/11 attacks, qualifying them to have had to have done it in a different manner, which very well might have dissolved the very excuse to the wars that they were looking for, if not the entire war on terror entirely, substantively changing many of the policies specifically developed and pre-written in a wish list of the insurrectionists' Confederate desired policies against the security of the American public. These uses of insurrection are an infinite threat to everyone. In the Soviet Union, I believe there was the light blue helmets, and they had infinite arbitrary authority, as the FBI is currently seeking, along with the rest of the Confederate loyalists. And their favorite tactic in these arbitrary things is a fully diverse infinite threat, which includes the natural tendency towards every arbitrary satisfaction of every lust and its variation. If a government wizard likes your wife, he could threaten you with life in jail in a gulag. And you have to let him have sex with your wife, or you will suffer the injury. And she will receive the same threat, however you respond. And if she, in order to save your life, has sex with the government wizard, your refusal will still end in your punishment. And if you accepted it, and she accepted it, they could still throw you away because it's infinite arbitrary and has no basis in any form of reality, especially base reality, where you do not rely on what the government has already written its will to be. And the enforcement of this arbitrary will, even against its own wizards, has its complete and total sacrifice function. As historic sacrifice systems go, it is the blood of the sacrifices which validates the future of that system. And when you are written to be a sacrifice, know unequivocally there is nothing you can say or do that will change the slightest thing about their intention, which does not care about anything you could possibly tell them. They believe and want what they believe and want, and nothing else matters to them, is the way of their magic lust.